By the time you're watching this, Artemis II is no longer sitting on the launch pad. It is already in space. The launch is no longer something we are waiting for. It has already happened. The boosters separated, and 4 astronauts left Earth behind, beginning a journey that will take them further away from home than any human has been in over half a century. And right now, as this mission quietly unfolds, the most important phase is already underway. Not the launch, but what comes immediately after, because reaching space is no longer the challenge it once was. We've done that many times before. What we haven't done, at least not in decades, is send humans back into deep space, beyond the protective boundary of low Earth orbit. So at this very moment, inside that spacecraft, systems are being checked, life support is being monitored, navigation and control systems are being verified under real conditions, with real people on board. And none of it is guaranteed. Because this mission is not just a journey around the moon, it is a test. A test of whether everything we've built is truly ready for what comes next. And that is where the story really begins. And the first small step for this crew will be towards solving a new problem that NASA has never had to figure out before. Going back to the moon isn't just a matter of building a rocket and pointing it in the right direction. The plan this time is to build a permanent human presence in deep space. To do that safely, you need to know exactly how your spacecraft behaves with human beings inside. That's what Artemis II is. A crude test of the most powerful rocket ever launched with 4 people on board who will find out if it's actually ready. This is who they are, what they're going to do, and why this mission is bigger than most people realize. Leading the mission will be Commander Reed Wiseman. He spent 27 years as a fighter pilot in the US Navy before joining NASA's astronaut ranks in 2009. He flew to the ISS for the first time in 2014 on board a Russian Soyuz rocket and later became NASA's Chief of the Astronaut Office in 2020. Victor Glover will pilot the spacecraft. Also, a former US Navy airman who was deployed in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He made his first trip to Earth orbit in 2020 on board a SpaceX Dragon capsule. Christina Cook is a mission specialist. She has a background as an electrical engineer, Antarctic explorer, and firefighter before joining NASA in 2002. She holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a female astronaut with 328 consecutive days in space. Jeremy Hansen is another mission specialist, also a veteran fighter pilot. Hansen has actually never been to space, but he has spent time as an aquanaut, which is long-duration deep-sea diving. He's also the first Canadian who will fly to the moon. These 4 people will spend 10 days in space on a flight that will take them around the moon and could reach a distance over 400,000 kilometers away from the Earth. That is further away from home than any human has ever traveled. From here, the Earth will look like a small and distant glow behind the lunar horizon, a sight that was first captured by the crew of the Apollo 8 mission in the year 1968. This is a photograph that has come to be known as Earthrise. It's the first clear image ever taken of the Earth and the Moon together. Before that, people had only seen grainy, low-quality images of outer space taken by cold mechanical probes. This was a scene composed through the human eye and captured on color film, and it changed the world. Just like Artemis II, Apollo 8 was the first crewed test flight of a brand new, state-of-the-art technology. And we have come a long way since the 1960s. This is our new spacecraft. The design is known as Orion, but this particular capsule has been named Integrity by its crew. Compared to the old Apollo capsule, it has 60% more internal volume. That's what allows the vehicle to accommodate a crew of 4. While the previous moon missions capped out at 3, beyond just an extra chair, the new design offers some luxuries that were not available in the past, chief among them being a space toilet. Ever since the space age began, engineers have obsessed over efficiency. Back in the Apollo days, the best and bravest NASA astronauts had to pee in a hose and poop into a plastic bag. Sometimes they missed. And that led to some nasty stuff floating around in a very confined space. Orion has the new Universal Waste Management System. It's based on the same toilet they use on the ISS. And it's located inside a wall of the spacecraft behind a small door for privacy. The astronauts will also be bringing a gym to the moon. Because these Artemis missions are designed to be long duration, the crew needs to exercise every day in order to maintain their muscle mass and bone density in the microgravity environment. So, the capsule is equipped with this simple rowing machine that allows them to get in a full body workout. For meals, the crew will be eating dried food packets that get rehydrated with fresh water. One of the advantages of a relatively short duration spaceflight is that there's no need to recycle water on Artemis II. So unlike astronauts on the ISS, they will not be drinking their own pee. Human waste from the toilet system will simply be vented out into space. And of course, the most important part of the mission, the crew will be taking photos and videos of the most spectacular view as they fly around the moon. The Orion spacecraft will be equipped with professional-grade cameras and recording systems, capturing both the view beyond the windows and the experience inside the capsule. The crew will document their journey in a way that has never been done before. And for the first time, astronauts will also be allowed to bring personal devices with them into deep space, offering a more direct and human perspective on the mission. But before any of this can happen, there is launch day. This is what NASA had been preparing for over the better part of the last decade. And now, the launch is no longer something we are waiting for. It has already happened. The Space Launch System has lifted off, carrying the Orion spacecraft and its crew away from Earth. What we're looking at is not a single vehicle, but a combination of two, the SLS booster below and the Orion capsule at the top. At the moment of launch, 4 hydrogen-fueled RS-25 engines ignited first, building up thrust beneath the rocket. On their own, they weren't enough to lift the vehicle, but seconds later, the 2 solid rocket boosters fired. Each of those boosters is roughly the height of a 1-7-story building, producing more thrust than 2 Falcon 9 rockets combined. Together, they generated the majority of the rocket's power, more than 75% pushing the entire system upward with a force greater than anything any human has ever experienced. For those watching from the ground, it was not just powerful, it was bright. When SLS first launched during Artemis I, it briefly turned night into day, and this time, that same intensity returned, marking the beginning of a new journey beyond Earth. But for the crew, inside the Orion capsule, there was no view of that moment. Their spacecraft remained enclosed, focused instead on the data streaming across their displays. Above them, mounted at the very tip of the vehicle, sat the launch abort system. If anything had gone wrong, 4 small rocket motors would have activated within milliseconds, pulling the capsule away from the booster, separating it from the vehicle, and allowing it to descend safely under parachutes. It wasn't needed, because about 2 minutes into flight, the solid boosters separated cleanly, falling away from the rocket and trailing sparks as they descended back toward Earth. By then, the vehicle had already passed through the densest layers of the atmosphere. What remained was a system built not just on new engineering but on decades of experience. Even the engines themselves carry that legacy. Derived from the same RS-25 design once used on the Space Shuttle, the remaining core stage continued to burn, carrying the crew higher and faster, until roughly 8.5 minutes after liftoff, when it shut down and separated. From that point on, a single upper stage engine took over, pushing the spacecraft into a high Earth orbit. And then, around 20 minutes after launch, that stage separated as well, What remained was only Orion, a small spacecraft, now alone in space, carrying 4 humans further from Earth than any have traveled in generations. And from here, the mission begins to change, because getting to space was only the first step. From here, the mission begins to unfold in a very different way. Right now, the crew is likely moving along an oval-shaped path around the Earth, what we call an elliptical orbit. At one end of that orbit, they reach an altitude of roughly 70,000 kilometers. That alone places them further from Earth than any human has traveled in decades. But on the opposite side, they descend to just about 185 kilometers above the surface. This is not incidental. It is by design, because over the next couple of days, this shifting orbit allows the crew to carefully test every critical system on board the Orion spacecraft and its attached service module. That service module, the cylindrical section at the rear, is where much of the mission's functionality resides. It houses the main engine, the maneuvering thrusters, the crew's oxygen and water supply, and the solar arrays that provide power for the entire spacecraft. Together, those panels generate enough electricity to sustain the mission continuously. But power is not the first priority. Life support is. At this stage, the most important question is whether the spacecraft can safely sustain human life beyond low Earth orbit. Every system is being monitored: air, pressure, refill, temperature, because if any of these fail, nothing else matters. Then comes control. Navigation and maneuvering must be precise. And recent history has shown how critical that is. On an earlier crewed test flight of a new spacecraft design, issues with thrusters forced the vehicle to return without its crew, leaving astronauts waiting months for another ride home. So this time, nothing is assumed. Instead, the crew performs a controlled test. At some point during this phase, the spacecraft is expected to rotate, turning its nose back toward the second stage of the rocket, the same stage that carried them into orbit and is now drifting nearby. From there, manual control takes over. The pilot begins guiding the capsule toward that distant target, using visual markers to align the spacecraft as if preparing to dock. The two vehicles never actually connect, but the maneuver itself reveals whether the control systems behave as expected under real conditions, because on future missions, this will not be a simulation. It will be required. And if anything during this phase does not perform as expected, there is still a way back. At the lowest point in their orbit, the crew retains the option to separate from the service module and return directly to Earth. But if everything is working, then the next step becomes possible. At the far end of that elliptical path, when the spacecraft is at its highest point above Earth, the engines are expected to ignite once again. Not to stay in orbit, but to leave it entirely. If everything is going as planned, the spacecraft is now approaching the point where it will leave Earth orbit entirely. From here, Orion enters what is known as a free return trajectory with the Moon, which, in simple terms, means that from this point forward, gravity takes over. As the spacecraft moves out toward the far side of the Moon, lunar gravity will begin to pull it inward, curving its path back around toward the near side, and from there, Earth's gravity will gradually take control again, guiding the crew back home without the need for major course corrections. It is an elegant solution, and one that has been used before. In fact, it was this exact trajectory that helped save the crew of Apollo 13. After an explosion damaged their spacecraft and left them with limited power and oxygen. Now, Orion is following a similar path, and if all continues as expected, the journey is expected to take roughly 4 days to reach the Moon. During that time, the mission becomes something quieter but no less important, because the astronauts are not just traveling through space, they are becoming part of the experiment. With modern sensors and wearable systems, their bodies are being monitored continuously. tracking how human biology responds to an environment far beyond low Earth orbit. Something we still don't fully understand. One of the key concerns is radiation. The spacecraft itself provides shielding against the constant background radiation of space. But there is always the possibility, however unlikely, of a solar event, a sudden release of energy from the sun that can send high-energy particles across the solar system. So the crew prepares for that possibility. At some point during the journey, they are expected to rehearse moving into a small, protected area within the spacecraft, surrounded by supplies that can provide additional shielding if needed, not because it is expected, but because it is possible. And then, around the 6th day of the mission, Orion is expected to reach the Moon. Approaching from a wide arc, the spacecraft is expected to pass behind the lunar far side, coming within roughly 10,000 kilometers of the surface, further out than any Apollo mission, but wide enough to reveal something different. From this distance, the Moon is no longer just a landscape. It becomes a world, a full, curved horizon stretching far beyond anything a human eye has seen before. And yet, this moment will be brief. Within just a few hours, the spacecraft is expected to continue along its path, leaving the Moon behind and beginning the long journey back to Earth. And eventually, there is only one way home: re-entry. It is, without question, the most dangerous phase of the entire mission. At this point, Orion is no longer simply orbiting or traveling through space. It is falling back toward Earth. Before reaching the atmosphere, the spacecraft must make one final adjustment, angling itself with precision so that it does not enter too steeply or too shallow. Then, the service module separates, and the capsule turns, positioning its heat shield directly into the path of what comes next. Because returning from the Moon is not the same as returning from low Earth orbit. The speed is far greater, over 40,000 kilometers per hour. And as the capsule meets the upper layers of the atmosphere, that speed is converted into heat, extreme heat. Temperatures rising to several thousand degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt metal. For a few minutes, the spacecraft becomes a controlled fireball. This is why Artemis I is without a crew, to prove that this system could survive. And now, that same system is carrying people. There is confidence in the design, but in human spaceflight, safe is always a relative term, because beyond Earth's atmosphere, there are no guarantees, only margins, only preparation, and the hope that everything performs exactly as expected. If it does, the capsule will slow, descend, and deploy its parachutes over the Pacific Ocean. And there, waiting below, will be recovery teams ready to bring the crew back from a journey that, until now, had not been attempted in generations. This will be a historic moment not just for NASA but for human spaceflight on a global scale. It's a small reminder of our true capability as explorers because of course people have walked on the surface of the Moon. They did that a long time ago. And that's not what Artemis II is trying to be. It's not about a rush to plant a new flag. It's the beginning of a new chapter in human exploration of outer space. So, we are on the verge of something amazing right now. But we still have so much more to come.